Talking Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Glasgow Times podcast, recorded in the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @QNReview. That is @CUENDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cuenreview.com. That is INFORMATION@CUENDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
Evening Times, August 3. Opinion. George Redmond says, "The blatant arrogance of the SNP is finally being recognised." I have been tense this week, it's true. I've been feeling like I've been holding my breath and not remembering to quite let it out properly. That was until Tuesday afternoon, when we learned the recall petition in Rutherglen had been successful. What a sigh of relief that was. Thank goodness the people have seen some sense eventually. The blatant arrogance of the SNP is finally being recognised to the point that democracy in action is listening to people saying enough is enough. Ferrier's faux pas during the COVID pandemic reeked of the kind of above-the-law politics that has been all too prevalent within our SNP elected representatives over the past 10 years. Do as I say, not as I do, and if I get criticised for any decision that I make, then it's all the fault of the UK government, and an independent Scotland would save it all. Sound familiar? Yes, it does to me too, and it's utter nonsense. We have had to watch while the Scottish Government have overseen the demise of our education system, the chronic failure to deliver on our NHS timetables, drug deaths in our country soar, homelessness levels spiral out of control, and the horrific burning of money that is now simply referred to as the Ferries fiasco. Quaint. While this has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen, what is the First Minister Humza Yousaf doing? Presenting a paper on independence and holding up fake passports he has had printed somewhere. Acting ultra vires and outside of the scope of the Scottish Parliament, ignoring looking after the issues that we need to deal with here and now for some ideological theory that over half the people in Scotland do not want. We also have Angus Air Miles Robertson flying all over the world, as if he is one of the Wright brothers setting up embassies and spending even more money doing this. While at home, in the Scottish Parliament, we have hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money being spent on wages and research into how an independent Scotland would work. It's terrifying, mind-numbing, and frightening that this is where we find ourselves. Just think of how many waiting lists in hospitals could be reduced with extra staff that cash could be used to employ, or how many affordable social homes could be built, or by how much we could actually close the attainment gap, as previously promised by former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, or how many lives could be saved by concentrating on reducing that drug death figure. That's the reality we are facing. A government who wants to continue to force their ideologies down people's throats. Or do we want politicians who want to make a real difference to our citizens here and now? So yes, it was a sigh of much relief when the results came in on Tuesday. Ferrier out. Labour will roll their sleeves up and ensure the people of Rutherglen know we are offering a real, prosperous alternative. Bring it on. Another thing I wanted to mark this week was the passing of my dear friend Paul Smith last week. Paul will be laid to rest later this week, and it is with the heaviest of hearts that I will be delivering the eulogy. A warm, friendly and caring guy, who always had a smile on his face and a good word to say. Paul will be sorely missed by all. The world is a bit less bright with him in it. Sleep well, my friend, says George Redmond, Labour Party councillor in the Carlton ward. Evening Times, August 3. Opinion. John Molyneux says the real power of the bike is fighting climate challenge. The UCI Cycling World Championships get underway in Glasgow today. This will be the biggest cycling event ever, with rainbow jerseys on offer to world champions across 13 disciplines, from the familiar road and track racing to the more expressive freestyle BMX and cycle ball. Glasgow is the host city for this new event, with some competitions taking place in other parts of Scotland between August 3, today, and August 13. That the city has been chosen is a testament to its track record in hosting major events, and specifically to the investment which has been made in world-class cycling facilities, including the Sir Chris Hoy Velodrome and Knightswood BMX Centre. We should be proud of Glasgow's ability to deliver events like this, which showcase the city internationally, as well as inspire positive local action. The idea of legacy is evident in the motto for the championships, which is the power of the bike. There are indeed many positive benefits of cycling, but its greatest power, its superpower, you might say, is fighting against climate change. Switching local journeys to cycling, as well as walking and wheeling, instead of using private cars, is one of the simplest, cheapest, and most effective ways we can reduce transport emissions, which remain stubbornly high in Glasgow. Glasgow has committed to delivering a comprehensive city-wide cycling network by 2030, which will make Glasgow a much safer and easier place to ride a bike. We know that the lack of safe, segregated infrastructure is the biggest barrier to getting more people cycling more often. The flagship South City Way, which is now complete all the way from the Broomielaw to Queen's Park, is seeing thousands of people use it every week. A cycle courier on Victoria Road has already recorded almost 150,000 journeys this year. There is truth in the saying, build it and they will come. Delivering a city-wide network is a big task, but it's time to ditch adjectives such as bold and ambitious, and instead use descriptions like urgent and necessary. The climate emergency demands that we make this change. So far this summer, we have seen the hottest day and hottest June on record, alarming marine heat waves, and record low Antarctic sea ice. These are unprecedented climate anomalies. Thousands will enjoy the skill, power and competitive spirit on display over the next fortnight, but for the climate's sake, I hope many are also inspired to give cycling a go. The city's bike hire scheme means people who don't own a bike can still use one to get around. There are groups across the city that can provide lessons, refresher courses, or confidence-building group rides. I was a late learner, and did not ride regularly until I moved to Glasgow. It's now my favourite way to get around. Journey time reliability is a big draw for me over either driving or public transport. Green councillors are determined to make Glasgow one of the most cycle-friendly cities on the planet because the future of the planet is at stake. There really is no better or more important time to embrace the true power of the bike, says John Molyneux.
From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 4th of August 2023, news. 13th note in Glasgow's Merchant City to host fundraising gig. By Amanda Keenan. Workers at the closure-hit Glasgow bar are staging a gig this weekend to kickstart their dream of buying it over. More than 20 staff at the 13th note in Merchant City lost their jobs when owner Jacqueline Fennessy suddenly pulled the plug in the middle of a long-running dispute over paying conditions. She claimed industrial action taken by employees over busy weekend periods had put the business in an unsustainable position and closed the doors on July the 18th without notice. A crowdfunding campaign, which was launched to support the stricken workers, has reached almost £9,000, and now a gig has been held at the Classic Grand in Jamaica Street on Sunday to further support those left out of work. Chef Nick Troy told the Glasgow Times that employees put their heart and soul into trying to make the business a success, and now want to follow their dream of becoming the note's new owners. He said, "We all put so much in and we don't want that to be lost. The team was there like a family and really looked out for one another." Everyone was devastated when Ms. Fennessy closed it down, just when we believed we were on the cusp of meaningful negotiations through ACAS that could have resolved our dispute. The support we have received from the public, our colleagues in hospitality across the city and officials at Unite the Union since has been superb, but we don't want to let the venue just disappear. The 13th note has always had a special place in the hearts of music lovers in Glasgow, and we want to do all we can to protect that and see the venue's legacy continue and be built on for years to come. Sunday's concert will include live music from artists such as Tina Sandwich, Apostille, Callum Baird, Shiannon, and Voss Ruff. Doors open at 7 p.m. All funds raised on the night will be used to support the campaign to reopen the node under workers' ownership, a move which the former employees say will reinstate the venue's cultural and social legacy. The gig will be the first step in a wider campaign to raise the cash needed to make an official approach to liquidators, with the night bosses calling on the public, trade unionists, councillors, MSPs and music lovers across the city to attend and support staff's ambitious plan. Nick added, "The sudden closure of the bar has placed people in serious financial distress. Ms. Fennessy still hasn't come forward with the legally required notice pay and have had to deal with the emotional and social impact of losing our livelihoods. In spite of this, we have rallied together and decided to fight back. Fundamentally, we believe in the 13th note as an institution, one that should not be run into the ground for private profit, but commonly shared among staff and patrons. Shiannon McElroy, a former 13th note worker, is one of those who will be taken to the stage on Sunday. She said, "The 13th note was the first venue I ever played in, so it's a lot of importance for me being beyond being my workplace. It provided an accessible cultural space for a lot of different music scenes, from those just starting out to the established acts. We want to protect and promote that, to re-establish and drastically improve the facility, and see it return to its roots of nurturing talent and welcoming creativity. Reopening the 13th note under workers' ownership would allow us to run the venue for the community. It would no longer be controlled by an absent owner who fails to appreciate its significance. Tickets are on sale now and can be purchased online at citizen-ticket.com. And that report was by Amanda Keenan. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 4th of August 2023, from the news section. Appeal after bird of prey discovered in Glasgow's Knightswood. Report by Eva White. A bird of prey has been discovered in a Knightswood street, sparking an appeal to trace its owner. The bird, reported to possibly be an eagle or Harris hawk, was found on Rampart Avenue. The Scottish SPA said it received reports of the stray bird after it was spotted in multiple gardens in the area. SSPCA officers have so far been unable to contain it. It is also reported that it has 2 chains around its ankles. The animal welfare charity is urging the owner or anyone who recognises the bird to phone its animal helpline on 03000 999 999. And that report was by Eva White. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 4th of August 2023, from the news section, exclusive. Meet the Glasgow bartender travelling the world to mix drinks. This article is by Marissa McWhirter. A rising star in Glasgow's bartending scene has revealed what it's like to transform a hospitality job into a dream career. Max Macaulay, 31, started working in hospitality while studying sound design at university. He thought the job would be temporary, but after graduating realised he had a knack for mixing drinks and chatting with the public. He currently oversees operations at Charing Cross Bar The Locale and Westside Tavern in the West End. He said, I think in Glasgow people view bartending as a stopgap. They go to university, they get a job in a bar, and then they go on to something else. I've heard people say that it's not a real job, but it's actually what you put into something that makes it a career or not. Over lockdown, Max started experimenting with different ingredients and mixing methods. He said, during lockdown, I started taking the drink side of things more seriously, reading lots of books. I took a CO2 tank home and started carbonating and fermenting different things. Max went on to compete in the global competition Patron Perfectionist and was crowned runner-up in the final held in Jalisco, Mexico in April. Since the competition, he has been invited to work incredible events including the Formula 1 Aramco British Grand Prix 2023 at Silverstone. He said, doing competitions gets you recognised. Now, with Patron, I've just gone to New Orleans for a week. I was working at the F1 and judging competitions. It's all paid work and that's good money on the side. You also have other opportunities to do guest pop-ups and travel. It can widen your horizons a lot. He added, this is not the end of it. What I've learned is you have to create a role for yourself. No one is going to hand you something. You have to go, this is what I'm really good at, this is what I need help with, and that's how you start progressing. Find out what you're good at and really push it. It's still pretty surreal, but it's good fun though. It's very motivating when people tell you you're good at something. You think, okay, I'm doing the right thing. I'm not just in a bar job. Max is releasing a new cocktail menu for Westside Tavern this weekend, inspired by New York icons like Samantha Jones and Jean-Michel Basquiat. He said, it's the people, places and characters that define New York. We did research into them and have taken the things we think represent them the best and created a drink around it. The new menu launches on August the 6th at 6 p.m. at Westside Tavern. Anyone who registers by emailing info@westsidetavern.co.uk, that's info@side, westsidetavern.co.uk, ahead of the event will receive a token for one free cocktail. And that article was an exclusive by Marissa McWhirter. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 4th of August 2023, from the news section, sex attacker who preyed on 5 girls in Kirkintilloch jailed, by Grant McCabe. A sex attacker who abused 5 young girls has been jailed for 9 years. Graham Kennedy, 54, was locked up at the High Court in Glasgow for the crimes dating back to the 1980s and 90s. The attacks occurred in Kirkintilloch, East Dunbartonshire. Kennedy first struck when he indecently assaulted a girl. He was also guilty of lewd and libidinous hate behaviour towards 3 other young victims, as well as raping one of them. Another of that trio was subjected to an indecent attack, with the final girl suffering in a similar way. Kennedy, latterly of Wigan, Greater Manchester, had denied the accusations at an earlier trial. He appeared via video link from prison to learn his fate. Lord Clark told him, "There is no alternative to a significant custodial sentence. You are sentenced to 9 years imprisonment." Kennedy was also put on the sex offenders list. And that article was written by court reporter Grant McCabe.
Evening Times, August 4. Opinion. Paul Sweeney asks, how can anyone justify cuts ending in job losses? Glaswegians are all too familiar with the perilous state of the city's public finances. For years we have experienced a dramatic decline in public services, from reduced refuse collections to a degradation in our roads and parks. Despite continued warnings, the cuts imposed by Glasgow City Council have taken their toll, and our city is on its knees. That is not a party political point. It is an indisputable fact that can be evidenced by the daily experience of those who live here. The latest target that will experience swingeing cuts is Glasgow Life. We recently learned that Glasgow City Council, following their annual budget, has instructed the organisation responsible for promoting and protecting the city's cultural assets to make cuts in excess of £7 million. Worst affected is Glasgow Museums and Collections, which will see 1/3 of all non-front-of-house roles cut. The impact of that ham-fisted hammer blow cannot be understated, and trade unions representing the workforce have gone as far as to say that cuts of this magnitude will make the future of Glasgow museums and collections unviable. Glasgow is world-renowned for its cultural process. From the Kelvingrove Art Gallery to the Borough Collection, our museums are among the best in the world, but their future is undoubtedly in jeopardy. Not only is the future of the city's museums and collections at risk, but there are now almost 40 jobs at stake, with the financial consequences that entail for those workers and their families in the midst of a cost of living crisis. As a city, we cannot allow this to continue. It is beyond comprehension that workers and families bear the brunt of austerity simply because the political will to shake up the system is non-existent. We could be exploring ways to generate revenue and ultimately increase the size of the envelope available to the likes of Glasgow Life. A small entry fee for those from outside the city would generate much-needed funds for museums directly, while an expansion of the ludicrously small Glasgow City Council boundary would ensure that those living in neighbouring local authorities contribute to the finances of the city that many of them frequent daily. Prior to the dissolution of the Strathclyde Regional Council, there was a fair and equitable share of revenue generated from all areas within the Strathclyde region boundary, including those now labelled Renfrewshire and Dunbartonshire. Now we have the perverse spectacle of some of the poorest communities in the city funding all the cultural assets, while those in the suburbs are exempt. There are substantive solutions to the structural and deep-rooted financial problems we face as a city. The problem is that there is an inertia at the heart of our political institutions, an inertia that prevents big ideas or bold solutions and instead reaches a default setting of managed decline. Museums and collections are often assets that are undervalued and conform to the adage of "you don't know what you've got until it's gone." Make no mistake, they are popular, they are incredibly valuable, and they are to be cherished. To see them, and those who ensure that they can function at a world-class level, treated with such disdain, is that for many, particularly those in more impoverished areas, they are a lifeline and are often the only exposure an individual will have to art and cultural enrichment. One of the provisions undertaken by Glasgow Life that will be at risk, according to staff I have spoken with, is the school and community outreach programmes. If we are to reach an inflection point, this must be it. How can anyone justify swingeing cuts that will result in mass job losses, deprive young people in deprived communities of cultural enrichment, and ultimately threaten the very existence of our museums and collections? Instead, we should be bold, ambitious, and intent on improving the services that we have by any means necessary. If that means we need to look at funding these assets through a levy on those visitors from out with the city boundary, then so be it. Of course, exceptions should be made. For example, no one would expect children to pay and as such potentially deprive families of a day out. But we need to be forthright and manage our finances in a way that does not disproportionately impact on those who work there in the form of job losses. Glasgow should be proud of our culture and our heritage, but at present it is difficult to do that. It feels as though we are in a prolonged phase of managed decline, and that simply cannot continue, says Paul Sweeney. Evening Times, August 4. Lifestyle. Glasgow experts find mobility essential for hospital patients. Report by Anne Fotheringham. Glasgow researchers have found older patients are less safe in bed during hospital stays. The team from Glasgow Caledonian University has revealed that just 25 minutes of slow walking in hospital can help improve physical function and cut readmissions, and they are insisting their findings should be a red flag for change. World-leading experts, including Glasgow Caledonian University Professor of Health Behaviour Dynamics Sebastian Chastin and Professor Borja del Pozo Cruz from the University of Cadiz in Spain, say the study findings are a robust sign, backed up by science, that mobility within hospitals is essential. Professor Del Pozo Cruz said, "It should be a red flag in hospital care settings to say we have to do something to fix this. Getting people out of bed is more beneficial. Hospitals put people in bed because they think it is the safest place, but our research shows that it's not." The research team of scientists from Glasgow, Bristol, Spain, Norway, Belgium and Australia have published their findings in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. Researchers say most older people are very sedentary in hospital, often spending 95% of the day in bed or sitting. They can lose physical function very rapidly in a matter of days, leading to more health problems and re-hospitalization after being discharged. Professor Chastin explained, "The research findings are relevant to every hospital around the world. There is nothing we can do about the fact that, as we grow older, at some point we are going to have some health problems and end up in hospital for a period of time. But hospitals are organized in such a way that often, for multiple reasons, people are immobilized and asked to stay in bed and are not encouraged to be active. Even just walking around creates problems in the structure of the hospital, but all that time you are spending immobilized means that you're becoming less fit and deconditioned very quickly. Research has been carried out in space and in multiple settings that show within 24 hours you lose a vast amount of your muscle mass and cardiovascular fitness. The likelihood is that you will get better from the specific condition you were hospitalized for, but while you were there, you were actually making your body worse for many other reasons. We are sympathetic to the clinical staff that are overburdened everywhere. It's actually beneficial to everyone in the long run. Professor Del Pozo Cruz and Chastain said there was a growing grassroots movement called End Pajama Paralysis of frontline healthcare staff around the world who want to see this happen to make their lives easier, but it is not supported by the system. Report by Anne Fotheringham. Evening Times, 7th of August. Opinion. Cutting homelessness services is unconscionable, says Mike Daly. Something deeply troubling is happening in the provision of homelessness services in Glasgow. At a time when there is an ever-increasing demand for emergency accommodation, we appear to be introducing and planning for more cuts to homeless accommodation. How can that be conscionable? The Glasgow City Integration Joint Board, IJB, published a report on June 28 this year, which explained it forecast an overspend on homelessness services in 23-24 by £16.59 million. So it was introducing further immediate cuts of around £5 million. The IGB took this action knowing that it could stymie its ability to perform statutory duties to homeless persons under the 1987 Housing Scotland Act. The report said, proposals in addressing homelessness pressures are likely to increase risk of non-compliance with statutory duties. This paper sets out proposals which will ensure the SHCP statutory responsibilities remain protected wherever possible, whilst delivering the necessary financial savings. It should also be noted that whilst Glasgow Homelessness Services have fully complied with their statutory duty to provide emergency accommodation, we equally recognise that by doing so, we are in breach on the unsuitable accommodation order by more than 600 households. That is quite an extraordinary admission, a clear recognition that further financial cuts means acting in breach of statutory duties as a local authority, which results in having to act unlawfully on more occasions. Yet it gets worse than this. How are the cuts of £5 million to be achieved? On page 11 of the IJB's report, we are told that 2 recovery plans have been identified to reduce the provision of emergency hotel and B&B accommodation available for homeless persons in the city. The solution selected is removing the availability of 78 beds from the Charles Rennie Mackintosh Homeless Hotel, as well as a slow-down admission to emergency accommodation. This will save almost £5 million in 23-24, we are told. The IJB expressly concedes this will result in a reputational risk to itself, together with the risk of more judicial review challenges in the Court of Session from non-compliance with legal duties. From my reading of the IJB report, in essence what has been introduced is a reduction in the provision of emergency temporary homeless accommodation, managed by the creation of bottlenecks to prevent access to statutory services. It is the equivalent of turning off a life-saving tap for a significant percentage of vulnerable homeless persons. In 22-23, the IJB claimed almost £12 million in COVID-19 monies for homeless services in Glasgow, paragraph 2.12 of its June report. That funding has now evaporated, and in truth, this must be the primary source of the projected overspend. The £5 million cuts introduced are relatively small in the scale of Glasgow City Council's overall budget. However, they will have a profoundly detrimental impact on the lives of many vulnerable human beings who simply seek emergency homeless accommodation. Admittedly, there are also demand-led drivers here. The decision of mayors and the Home Office to accelerate the number of people being moved out of accommodation following successful asylum claims results in an additional pressure of 600 homeless households per annum. During the first weeks of May this year, the IJB confirmed that this demand translated into 50 presentations per week seeking homelessness emergency accommodation, and resulted in hotel and B&B accommodation numbers increasing to almost 800, with spot purchasing of higher cost hotels now becoming the norm in order to sustain statutory duties. Changes to the local connection duty from last November meant that Glasgow accommodated an additional 75 households who had no connection with the city between November and May this year. Clearly, the use of B&B accommodation can be very expensive. Why do we rely on it so much? The short answer is Glasgow is a stock transfer city with no meaningful number of council houses, so it relies upon local housing associations. Glasgow's local letting plan for 23-24 revealed that Glasgow had a shortfall in securing permanent lets of around 1,600 homes. The goal was to secure 4,500 lets annually. However, in 22-23, homelessness services were provided with 2,900. All of these problems come back to the ongoing shortage in affordable housing in Scotland generally, another crisis that seems to be accepted and tolerated with no sense of urgency to address. In my opinion, we have got our priorities all wrong. Every other week we hear of the waste of large sums of public money, whether through incompetence, misfortune, or simply poor public service policy development or delivery. One example of this is the failed deposit return scheme. £86 million wasted, but the total bill could reach much higher if compensation has to be paid out. The Scottish Government's improvements in homelessness law have been excellent, but they need funded as a matter of urgency, says Mike Daly. Evening Times, 7 August. Just transition will help create safer streets and healthier lives, says Martha Wardrop. When large parts of the world are experiencing intense heat waves and rising ocean temperatures, the UK government has announced hundreds of new oil and gas licenses. This action by the UK government has committed to increased fossil fuel extraction, which is climate vandalism. These new oil and gas exploration licenses will be catastrophic for our climate and do nothing for the city's security. The climate crisis is the greatest security threat that Glasgow will ever face. We know that reducing our reliance on fossil fuels is critical to our net zero future. We need to support a just transition for Glasgow, which implements decarbonisation that meets our climate ambitions. This is more urgent than ever. We know that is the unfairness of our economy that is really to blame. It is the richest few who are responsible for causing most of the damage and loss, but it is those with the least who are most affected by climate change. Climate change is unfair, and this is why we need to focus on addressing climate justice. We can and must do more locally to provide a greener, fairer future. Greens are delivering on our commitment to set out an ambitious net zero transition plan and laying the foundation for a just and prosperous future in which no one is left behind. In the autumn of 2022, Glasgow City Council established a cross-party Just Transition Working Group, convened by Scottish Green Councillor Elaine Gallagher. The working group has drawn on a wide range of people's knowledge and experience to help shape our city's future as we move from a post-industrial to post-carbon city. Elaine has shown strong leadership in taking forward this work as a fair and just transition, as an environmental necessity, and is absolutely key to our city's security. The Just Transition Working Group report and its 18 recommendations have been published on the Council's website. This provides a focus on 4 areas, including the just transition approaches adapted by the government, as well as the preparations by the private sector. The key role of communities, trade unions and citizens is also detailed in the report. In addition, the Council's actions to enable a just transition to take place are outlined. The report will be presented as part of the agenda for the Net Zero and Climate Progress Monitoring City Policy Committee on August 8. In the coming weeks, there will be an opportunity to engage in discussions on the recommendations covering green skills and jobs, improvements to transport and mobility, home retrofit, investment funds, access to green space, and community engagement to increase public participation. Our focus will be on taking forward the report's recommendations at pace and maximising the opportunities for a just transition across all our communities. We have to follow a just transition process with workers and local communities at the forefront. We need to take decisive action for a fast and fair transition to net zero, which provides warmer homes, safer streets, and healthier lives, says Martha Wardrope. Evening Times, August 7. Opinion. Thomas Kerr says, SNP Green plans to hike council tax is abhorrent. As a Shettleston councillor, I know how many people and families are struggling with the cost of living crisis. That is why I am astonished that the SNP Green government is currently consulting on putting up council tax bills for thousands of Glaswegians. If these changes are implemented in time for the 24-25 financial year, then they won't just be minimal increases. It is proposing to deliver bombshell increases of between 7.5% and 22.5% for those living in Band E to H properties in the city. There is often a common misconception, one which seems to be happily peddled by SNP Green ministers, that it is only the really well-off who live in these sorts of houses. The reality is that many of these people will be hard-working families or single people on their own who were fortunate enough to purchase these homes and are reliant on outdated council tax valuations still being in force. These proposed increases will terrify them. They will wonder why on earth they are asked to bear the brunt of the SNP failing to fund our councils properly year after year. Those savage cuts have impacted day-to-day services that people of all ages rely on, yet now the SNP want people to pay the price. That is typical of the contempt they have shown for local authorities during their 16 years in power. They are not interested that people will have to pay more, but get less. Research by my party fully exposed what these increases will mean in reality. More than 32,000 Glaswegians are living in Band E properties and will have to fork out £148 a year more in their council tax bills. For those living in Band H properties, they will somehow have to find the ability to pay a whopping £826 a year more. This will affect almost 700 Glaswegians. Launching this consultation during a time when Parliament is in recess is also typical of this SNP Green government, keen to avoid scrutiny or challenge on its bombshell plans. I suspect some people may be unaware of what this government is planning, which is why I am keen to highlight it in my column this week and will continue to do so. These proposals would have a devastating impact on personal and household finances across Glasgow and, in turn, harm the economic recovery of our city, with people having less to spend in our shops, restaurants and pubs. There is still plenty of time to voice your opposition to the plans, with the consultation open until September 20. I hope Glaswegians send as loud a message as possible that these plans should be scrapped immediately, especially during a cost of living crisis. To do so, you can do that at gov.scot/news, council-tax-consultation, says Councillor Thomas Kerr.
From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section, Altyre Street, Glasgow, multiple police staff take unwell amid incident. Report by Marissa McWhirter. Police officers were given medical treatment at the scene as some 80 people were evacuated from their homes when potentially hazardous material was found in a flat. 7 police officers and a Scottish Police Authority Forensic Service staff member took unwell and were treated on site in the east end of Glasgow. A bomb disposal team was called to the incident on Monday night as police cordoned off several streets. Police arrived at the flat in Altyre Street, Shettleston, shortly after 5 p.m. on Monday evening and remained on site well on Tuesday. Residents, whose homes were evacuated as a precaution, were allowed to return home by Tuesday morning. The affected streets, Altyre Street, Dalness Street, R Street and Trainard Avenue, were reopened, having been closed overnight. Chief Superintendent Alan Waddell said, "Our inquiries into the incident are ongoing and there will be a continued police presence in the area. We are working closely with our partners." I would like to thank residents and motorists for their patience whilst we dealt with this incident. There was no danger to the wider public. A spokesperson for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service said, "We were alerted at 5:39 p.m. on Monday, the 7th of August, to reports of an incident involving suspected hazardous materials at a property in Altar Street, Glasgow. Operations Control mobilised a number of resources to the scene, including specialist hazmat units." And that report was by Marissa McWhirter. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section, BMW driver doing 102 miles per hour on M8 thought it was a racetrack. Report by Rebecca Newlands. A driver who thought the M8 was a racetrack has allegedly been caught driving 30 miles over the limit. Cops were carrying out speed checks on the motorway on Monday afternoon when they clocked a BMW. They detected that the car was travelling at 102 miles per hour in a 70 miles per hour limit. The driver has been reported to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, COPFS. A spokesperson said, "Motherwell Road Police were conducting a speed check on the M8 motorway this afternoon and detected this vehicle travelling at 102 miles per hour in a 70 miles per hour limit. The driver clearly thought it was a racetrack. The driver has been reported to the COPFS." And that report was by Rebecca Newlands. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section, Glasgow High Court, thug attacked man with hammer. Report by Grant McCabe. A hammer thug chased his victim into a restaurant to attack him amid claims his son had earlier been threatened. George Spence, 48, struck Jack O'Neill up to 8 times with a weapon in Sizzler's Takeaway in Cambuslang, Lanarkshire, last October 29th. Spence was captured on CCTV carrying out the crime, which left the 24-year-old badly hurt, including fractured ribs and a punctured lung. The first offender could now face jail after he appeared in the dock at the High Court in Glasgow. He pleaded guilty to assaulting Mr O'Neill to a severe injury, permanent disfigurement and impairment, as well as to the danger of his life. Spence, also of Cambuslang, will be sentenced next month. Prosecutor Angela Gray told how Mr O'Neill had been going to Sizzlers that night when he spotted a Subaru Impreza pulling up nearby. The motor was driven by Spence's son George Jr., 23, with his dad the passenger. Miss Gray. The car stopped and Spence got out. He shouted to Jack O'Neill, "You are getting it." Spence was holding a ballpoint head hammer. He swung it and tried to hit him. CCTV footage from the takeaway saw the victim race inside and behind the counter for safety. Miss Gray. Spence followed him into the shop to continue the attack. George Jr. got out, made his way into Sizzlers and shouted at his father to get back in the car. Spence swung the hammer, striking Jack O'Neill 7 or 8 times on the body. The attacker fled in the Subaru before the victim was initially helped home. But he ended up in hospital needing an emergency operation. Having lost 2 litres of blood, Mr O'Neill also had his spleen removed. The court heard he would have passed away without surgery. He will be on medication for the rest of his life, as well as being at risk to chest and brain infections. Spence's KC, Mark Stewart, said, "From the word go, he has accepted his conduct was unacceptable." The hearing was told that the dad claimed the attack was sparked after his son had almost bumped into Mr O'Neill in his car shortly before. It was alleged Mr O'Neill confronted Spence Jr., leaving him panicked. He then told his dad, who apparently got out his sickbed and eventually attacked the victim. Lord Beckett continued bail as sentencing was deferred for reports. And that article was written by Grant McCabe. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section, investigation underway after dog found emaciated in Glasgow. Report by Nicole Mitchell. An investigation is underway after an emaciated dog was found in Glasgow. The tan Staffordshire Bull Terrier type dog was found on Dumbarton Road in the Whiteinch area on Monday, July 31st. She was handed to a member of the public by a man after they confronted him about the state of the dog, who the Scottish SPCA described as being in extremely poor condition. The dog is now in the care of the SSPCA, who are investigating the incident and are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Gillian Dick, SSPCA inspector, said, "The dog is a tan, adult female Staffordshire Bull Terrier type dog. She is in extremely poor condition and emaciated. She was handed to a member of the public by a man after they confronted him about the state of the dog. He claimed the dog belonged to his friend. We are keen to speak to the person who was looking after the dog and the person who owns her. Unfortunately, she is not microchipped, so we are unable to trace any or details. If anyone recognises this dog, or has any information about her circumstances, they should call our confidential animal helpline on 03000 999 999. That's 03000 999 999. And that article was by Nicole Mitchell. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section. M8 Kingston Bridge crash, person in hospital and second arrested. Report by Marissa McWhirter. A person was rushed to hospital following a two-car crash on the M8 motorway at Kingston Bridge. A driver was arrested for an alleged road traffic offence following the collision. 999 crews raced to the scene around 5 p.m. on Monday following reports of the crash. We previously reported that the Russia incident sparked gridlock for motorists and traffic was restricted westbound following the incident. The condition of the person in the hospital is unknown. A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "Around 5:25 p.m. on Monday, August the 7th, we were made aware of a two-car crash on the M8, Kingston Bridge, Glasgow. One person has been taken to hospital and one person has been arrested in connection with a road traffic offence." And that report was by Marissa McWhirter. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section. Man accused of abduction and murder bid on police officer in Glasgow, by Grant McCabe. A man is to stand trial accused of trying to kill a police officer. Joseph Ayite is alleged to have abducted and assaulted Kevin Reynolds at a flat in Winford Drive in Maryhill, Glasgow, last September 23rd. The officer is said to have been on duty at the time when he was detained against his will at the property, as the 27-year-old locked the front door. Prosecutors claim Ayite grabbed him before repeatedly striking him in the head, neck and body with a knife. The attempted murder charge states this was to his severe injury, permanent disfigurement and to the danger of his life. Ayite faces a separate allegation of attacking the officer's colleague Kirsty McGlynn at the flat by hitting her in the face and attempting to headbutt her. Among other accusations, Ayite is said to have repeatedly punched a woman in Glasgow's Queen Margaret Drive in the city's West End, as well as assaulting a worker at a nearby Tesco store. The indictment states that these occurred earlier in September 2022. The alleged attacker, also known as Martin Ayite and Jose Ayite, denied the accusations via his legal team at a hearing in the High Court in Glasgow. Lord Clark set a trial which is scheduled to start in April 2024, and that report was by Grant McCabe. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section. Man convicted of reckless driving can work as taxi driver, by Drew Sandilands. A man with convictions for reckless driving and setting fire to a car has been permitted to work as a taxi driver after promising he is a changed man. Glasgow's licensing committee handed a restricted 1-year licence to Abdullah Monsaf, after Police Scotland objected to his application. He was also issued with a severe warning over his conduct. A Police Scotland representative told councillors that the force believe Mr Monsaf is not a fit and proper person to be granted a taxi driver's licence. She said he had been fined £135 after he was observed by police driving in a culpable and reckless manner in October 2019. Then, in February 2020, he did wilfully set fire to a motor vehicle, the officer added, and was given a community payback order of 45 hours. Asked to explain his actions, Mr Monsaf said he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. He denied setting fire to the car but said his fingerprints were on it and he pleaded guilty. I didn't know initially what they were going to do, set it on fire, he added. Everyone hangs around with the wrong friends in their life when they're young. The driver said he was a changed man. He is now married and has been working for a first bus as a professional driver. On a daily basis, I have been dealing with the public as well and I have had no trouble, he added. He said he is working long shift and wants the flexibility offered by being a taxi driver. Mr Monsaf also said he has no points on his driving licence. And that report was by Drew Sandilands.
From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 8th of August 2023, from the news section, Man who raped Amber Gibson before her death jailed, by our court reporter. A man who raped a teenager 5 months before she was murdered by her brother has been sentenced to 10.5 years behind bars. Jamie Stars, 20, assaulted Amber Gibson and raped her while she was asleep or unconscious at a property in Bothwell in June 2021. Amber, 16, was sexually assaulted and murdered in November 2021 by her brother, Connor Gibson, who was convicted last month following a trial at the High Court in Glasgow. Stars was found guilty of raping the teenager following a separate trial at the High Court in Lanark in July. He was also convicted of raping another teenage girl in Bothwell, South Lanarkshire in May 2021. Judge Thomas Welsh KC handed Stars an extended sentence comprising 10.5 years in custody and 2 years of supervision upon release at the High Court in Edinburgh on Tuesday. Sentencing Stars, who appeared via video link from custody, the judge said, "You have been convicted of appalling crimes against 2 innocent teenage girls, and you have been assessed as being a very high risk of sexual violence on release. I am required to take into account your age and difficult upbringing. However, the crimes remain serious and grave, and I will impose an extended sentence." He said he would have ordered 11 years to be served in custody, but raises this to 10.5 years behind bars to take into account the time that Stars has spent on remand. The 20-year-old was also found guilty of a breach of bail conditions and of attempting to pervert the course of justice. He has been placed on the sex offenders register indefinitely. Giving a plea in mitigation, Michael Meehan KC, representing Stars, highlighted that, as he is under 25, the sentence must take into account sentencing guidelines which reflect that a younger person will have a lower level of maturity than an older person. He said a report identified that Stars shows cognitive and emotional immaturity. The lawyer had also urged the judge to consider his client's adverse childhood experiences when sentencing. He told the court that Stars was removed from parental care at the age of 3 and developed addiction issues from the age of 9. Mr. Meehan said, "He has a traumatic background from a young age, perhaps gives some degree of explanation." The sentencing comes a fortnight after Connor Gibson, 20, was convicted of attacking his sister Amber in Woodland in Hamilton, South Lanarkshire, in November 2021, removing her clothes, sexually assaulting with the intention of raping her, inflicting blunt force trauma to her head and body, and strangling her. Amber was reported missing on the evening of Friday, November the 26th, and her body was discovered in Cadshouse Glen at about 10:10 a.m. on November 28. Stephen Corrigan, 45, was found guilty of attempting to defeat the ends of justice and breach of the peace by intimately touching and concealing Amber's body after discovering it, instead of contacting the emergency services. Gibson will be sentenced on September the 4th for a crime Judge Lord Mulholland described as depraved, while Corrigan will also be sentenced next month. And that report was by our court reporter.
From the Glasgow Times of Tuesday, the 8th of August 2023, from the opinion section, Annie Wells, Council too slow to act when it comes to roads. As I write this week's column, the World Cycling Championships are in full swing in the city. Glasgow has a reputation of being a tremendous host of world-class sporting events, with many still having fond memories of the 2014 Commonwealth Games. These championships are a fantastic way to showcase our city to a global audience, with cyclists from around the world competing in various events. So I share the excitement of many of my fellow Glaswegians that a leading sporting event can be viewed on their own doorsteps. And I hope the championships can inspire people of all ages to take up cycling and follow in the footsteps of the likes of Katie Archibald. I also hope that in these challenging times during the cost of living crisis, this brings a welcome boost to our city's economy. However, I am not naive to the concerns raised by many residents and businesses ahead of and during the event. Preceding the start of the championships, people were quick to see the SNP-led Glasgow City Council employing contractors to repair portions of the city's roads. Normally, this would be a very welcome development. Far too many of our roads are simply not fit for purpose, so seeing the SNP-led council tackling the scourge of potholes and upgrading our infrastructure is a step in the right direction. However, the problem is that these repairs look to have been confined to fixing potholes on routes where cycling road races are taking place. That is a real kick in the teeth to motorists who shouldn't have had to wait for a major sporting event for the council to finally spring into action and get to work on our roads. That should be a basic requirement for the council to be carrying out on a day-to-day basis, but instead it has failed to act for too long. While it is true that last winter was particularly difficult and certainly only worsened the situation, the need to massively repair Glasgow's roads has been an incessant problem. Earlier this year, the council announced it was doubling its budget to £12 million to help ensure that roads would be fixed, as the number of reported potholes amounted to 7,000 in the first 2 months of this year alone. Not only was it stated that this doubled budget would go towards filling potholes, resurfacing streets and eliminating cracks, but that 6 million of this had to be reallocated, taken from a fund meant to improve our neighbourhoods. I welcome the greater attention that has been given to the poor state of the roads in Scotland's largest city. But much more needs to be done, and not only when the spotlight is on Glasgow. It is in this spirit that I urge Glasgow City Council to listen to the wide-ranging group of voices that have been calling for it to urgently outline a proper timescale for fixing our roads and ensure that these repairs are always of the highest quality standard. While one event is in full swing in Glasgow, it has been announced that another is to be cancelled for an indefinite period. Upon making the announcement, Glasgow Life indicated it is shifting its focus towards delivering other events during the winter and holiday seasons. The annual fireworks display on Glasgow Green was enjoyed by people of all ages and families in particular. I know they will be disappointed they will no longer get the chance to head down on bonfire night for the city's biggest organised display. The key word being organised. The cancellation of an official display will bring additional challenges for our already overstretched emergency services. We have already seen the dangers of non-organised displays in Glasgow, as well as Dundee. Dangerous individuals were reported aimlessly roaming streets with baseball bats, with fireworks being fired at police officers and damaging their vehicles. Subsequent criticism of the handling of non-organised events of this sort have focused largely on the SNP government's failure to work with local authorities in creating specific firework exclusion zones. One of the main problems with these zones is they take time to implement, with it being necessary for a consultation process to take place over the course of months. This makes it difficult to have these zones, whereby the use of fireworks would be illegal, ready in time. No council has yet begun to even launch such consultations. This means that later this year, Glasgow and other cities will potentially see a repeat of the violence endured last year by members of the public and emergency services. Yet again, the SNP have delivered legislation without thinking through what it will mean in reality, and failed to support our cash-strapped councils in their work. To help avoid a repeat of scenes we saw last November, I urge the SNP government to adopt the Scottish Conservatives' push for a fireworks safety plan to tackle the obvious shortcomings of the present process, so that as many people as possible can still enjoy firework festivities in a safe manner. This article was by Annie Wells from the Glasgow Times of Tuesday, the 8th of August 2023, from the opinion section. Cutting Homelessness Services is Unconscionable by Mike Daly. Something deeply troubling is happening in the provision of homelessness services in Glasgow. At a time when there's an ever-increasing demand for emergency accommodation, we appear to be introducing and planning for more cuts to homelessness accommodation. How can that be conscionable? The Glasgow City Integration Joint Board, IJB, published a report on June the 28th this year, which explained it forecast an overspend on homelessness services in 2023-24 by £16.59 million. So it was introducing further immediate cuts of around £5 million. The IJB took this action knowing that it could stymie its ability to perform statutory duties to homeless persons under the 1987 Housing Scotland Act 1987. The report said, proposals in addressing homelessness pressures are likely to increase risk of non-compliance with statutory duties. This paper sets out proposals which will ensure the HSCP statutory responsibilities remain protected wherever possible, whilst delivering the necessary financial savings. It should also be noted that whilst Glasgow Homelessness Services have fully complied with our statutory duty to provide emergency accommodation, we equally recognise that by doing so we are in breach on the unsuitable accommodation order by more than 600 households. End of quotation. That's quite an extraordinary admission. A clear recognition that further financial cuts means acting in breach of statutory duties as a local authority, which results in having to act unlawfully on more occasions. Yet it gets worse than this. How are the cuts of £5 million to be achieved? On page 11 of the IGB's report, we are told that 2 recovery plans have been identified to reduce the provision of emergency hotel and B&B accommodation available for homeless persons in the city. The solution selected is removing the availability of 78 beds from the Charles Rennie Mackintosh Homeless Hotel, as well as slow down admission to emergency accommodation. This will save almost £5 million in 2023-24, we are told. The IGB expressly concedes this will result in a reputational risk to itself, together with the risk of more judicial review challenges in the Court of Session from non-compliance with legal duties. From my reading of the IGB report, in essence what has been introduced is a reduction in the provision of emergency temporary homeless accommodation managed by the creation of bottlenecks to prevent access to statutory services. It's the equivalent of turning off a life-saving tap for a significant percentage of vulnerable homeless persons. In 2022-23, the IGB claimed almost £12 million in COVID-19 monies for homeless services in Glasgow, paragraph 2.12 of its June report. That funding has now evaporated, and in truth this must be the primary source of the projected overspend. The £5 million cuts introduced are relatively small in the scale of Glasgow City Council's overall budget. However, they will have a profoundly detrimental impact on the lives of many vulnerable human beings who simply seek emergency homeless accommodation. Admittedly, there are also demand-led drivers here. The decision of mayors and the Home Office to accelerate the number of people being moved out of accommodation following successful asylum claim results in an additional pressure of 600 homeless households per annum. During the first weeks of May this year, the IGB confirmed this demand translated into 50 presentations per week seeking homeless emergency accommodation and resulted in hotel and B&B accommodation numbers increasing to almost 800, with spot purchasing of higher cost hotels now becoming the norm in order to sustain statutory duties. Changes to the local connection duty from last November meant that Glasgow accommodated an additional 75 households who had no connection with the city between November and May this year. Clearly, the use of B&B accommodation can be very expensive. Why do we rely on it so much? The short answer is Glasgow is a stock transfer city with no meaningful number of council houses, so it relies upon local housing associations. Glasgow's local letting plan for 23-24 revealed that Glasgow had a shortfall in securing permanent lets of around 1,600 homes. The goal was to secure 4,500 lets annually. However, in 2023-23, homelessness services were provided with 2,900. All of these problems come back to the ongoing shortage in affordable housing in Scotland generally, another crisis that seems to be accepted and tolerated with no sense of urgency to address. In my opinion, we've got our priorities all wrong. Every other week we hear of the waste of large sums of public money, whether through incompetence, misfortune, or simply poor public service policy development or delivery. One example of this is the failed deposit return scheme. £86 million wasted. but the total bill could reach much higher if compensation has to be paid out. The Scottish Government's improvements in homelessness law have been excellent, but they need funded as a matter of urgency. This article was by Mike Daly.
Evening Times, August 9. Opinion. Glasgow's international reputation is to be envied, says Susan Aiken, leader of Glasgow City Council. What an incredible show Glasgow has put on with the UCI Cycling World Championships. On Sunday, our city was again in the international spotlight, hosting a truly world-class event in front of a global audience of millions. Glasgow, of course, rose to the occasion and did not disappoint. The 190,000 who gathered for the men's elite road race along the grueling 14-kilometre city circuit will not forget the thrill and privilege of watching some of the greatest cyclists in the history of the sport slog it out on our streets. The skill, bravery and endurance of the riders was truly breathtaking, and the drama right to the end was magnificent. Glasgow knows a thing or two about sport. Our city is unique in having been twice named European Capital of Sport, and we know even more about providing amazing support, as the past week has proven. The Glasgow crowds created a brilliant atmosphere at the weekend with their numbers, enthusiasm and volume, spurring the riders on and creating a new landmark in world cycling, Montrose Street. In the build-up to the championships, there have been some questions around Glasgow's suitability for staging a huge event like this. That's to be expected in most cities hosting something global. But on Sunday, and indeed throughout the championships, Glasgow has provided a stunning backdrop to the events we have staged. I am sure I speak for many Glaswegians when I say how proud I was of the images of Glasgow beamed across the world, our stunning cityscape surpassed only by the passion of the spectators. A great deal of planning goes into an event like UCI, and along with the Chamber of Commerce, we have engaged extensively with businesses in the build-up. There are always, however, going to be some disruption, and I would encourage any business impacted to contact our teams via the Get Ready Glasgow website, and they will respond as soon as possible. But when our city centre has been hit hard by the economic shocks of the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, the vibrancy and general busyness on display in recent days has been fantastic to see. Glasgow is really good at this stuff. In recent decades, we have shown repeatedly our ability to successfully host big events, from UCI to the Banksy exhibition to COP26. Like those who are lining up hundreds of millions of pounds in investment in Glasgow, they keep coming back because our city is a great place to be, and because we work very hard to attract and secure them. Beyond the immediate spend within the city during the championships, UCI helps maintain Glasgow's international profile and the interest in our city which comes with that. In a world where Brexit has made the job of promoting UK cities so much more difficult, that's profile our peers and competitors would bite our hands off for. And while cycling competitors take their chances for medals and world records, and fans enjoy a wonderful summer of sport, the Council has an opportunity to continue changing our great city for the better. As we target unprecedented investment in active travel, These championships can help us find another gear in our push to become a healthier, more active and better connected city. So, in the days remaining, enjoy yourself and your city, and whether it's on the road, on the track, or wherever you are watching, make sure they hear you. Top Tory Home Secretary Suella Braverman wants to house hundreds of asylum seekers in grim and inhumane conditions on the River Clyde. Following her failed attempt to fly those seeking sanctuary in the UK to camps in Rwanda, Ms. Braverman is forcing asylum seekers onto huge barges in several locations across the UK. Earlier this week, the first asylum seekers were moved onto a barge off the south coast of England. Described by Amnesty International as akin to floating Victorian prisons, Ms. Braverman now wants other areas to follow suit, with the Home Office exploring the potential of a site in Glasgow. But they have been told in no uncertain terms that Glasgow does not and will not support this cruel approach to often vulnerable and traumatised people. Last year, as an emergency response to the war in Ukraine, refugees were housed in a cruise ship on the Clyde. But let's be clear, these things are a world away from each other. While that situation was in no way ideal, Ukrainian refugees have very different rights from asylum seekers. They have the right to work, to stay with volunteer hosts, and to come and go as they please. But asylum seekers kept on these barges are forced to live in detention-like conditions where they will be kept for long periods of time with little or no access to anything but basic support. Unsurprisingly, Labour, the party which introduced the legislation denying asylum seekers access to many benefits in the first place, have confirmed that they will continue to use barges if they are elected at Westminster. Again, in pursuit of Tory votes, Sir Keir Starmer just shrugs his shoulders and claims there's nothing Labour can do. Well, in Glasgow, we treat asylum seekers with dignity and respect, even if we do so with Westminster tying our hands behind our backs. We are proud of our record of supporting and integrating asylum seekers and of the contribution they have made to our city, and we will do all we can to prevent human beings being treated in such a callous way in our city, says Susan Aiken, leader of Glasgow City Council.
That concludes this week's edition of the Glasgow Times podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, rate and review, and to tell your friends about our service.